Can you please state your name and your date of birth?
Ginger Drinkwater, March 2nd, 1935.
Okay. Ginger, when did you first experience Venice, know about Venice? What were the beginnings of your connection to Venice?
I was raised, I grew up in LA.
Okay.
And on the weekend, my dad would pile us into the car and we'd go down to Venice and Santa Monica to enjoy the pier and everything else. And that was my first experience.
So that was in the 40s, 1940s.
Yeah, yeah.
So will you talk a little about your perspective as a child of when you came to Venice? What were those experiences like, and what did you think of Venice?
I was immediately drawn to Venice for all the things. They had an artist there who would cut out silhouettes with black heavy paper and for portraits. And I became, an expert on the merry-go-round and, all kinds of things. So I was very connected to Venice from a very early age.
What were the things that really struck you that you remember back in those days?
Well, mainly the pier, mainly the boardwalk was what I was drawn to. Then as I got to be a teenager, I had a friend who had a car, and we would all pile in the car, and on Friday night we'd go down to Venice and cruise the alleys, just look at the ocean and listen to the music and drawn to it, So that was when I was a teenager. And when I got out of school and decided to move away, it was to Venice. I was coming out of the late 60s, rock and roll, the Doors, the Rolling Stones, all that, and it was quite prevalent there. People were wearing costumes, painting murals all over the place. There was a lot of high, beautiful energy going on. There were only two restaurants in Venice where you could eat, and one of them was on Wednesday night if you were in the arts, and that was all the arts, dance, poetry, whatever, besides painting. You could go in there and get a free spaghetti dinner. Wednesday night was a free spaghetti dinner.
Do you remember who did that, where it was?
It was on the oceanfront walk. And then there was the Lafayette Cafe that everybody met there at the Lafayette Cafe. And the thing that was beautiful about it was not just artists, but poets, writers. We all kind of came together.
Talk about those first years living here. Like, what kind of community did you develop? What were you doing? What was your experiences?
Well, I came out of Chenard and Parsons in LA, and at that time it was the abstract expressionism movement from New York. And so we would have teachers that would go back and forth from New York to LA. So there was quite an exchange and an influence of abstract expressionism. So when I came to Venice, I was still painting abstract expressionist paintings. And then from influences, I met my husband who passed away. But I met my husband, and he was a photographer. And somebody had taken a shot of us, both sitting side by side at a pool. And I was looking through the negatives, and I saw this, and it struck me so funny because we were both like twins, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And I said, "Oh, I've got to draw this out." It opened up a whole thing for me that I've been using ever since, and that's the combination of photography, drawing, and painting.
So will you talk a little bit about meeting Harry, your husband Harry, and those first years together in Venice?
Well, he was a photographer, and I was a painter, and we were just into the art community, I guess, quite a bit. There was quite a prevalent art community, and I remember seeing a documentation on Charlie Chaplin, who supposedly made his very first silent film here at the Oceanfront Walk in Venice. And it was called the Choo Choo Train. It was a little train. that he rode down the boardwalk, and it was called the choo-choo train. And so I was just right at home from the very beginning, and of course, needless to say, Harry had all the material he could possibly use. All you had to do was go down to the boardwalk. And there were people, like I say, in costumes. There were people standing on crates, espousing poetry. You know, if you were lucky, you would see Jim Morrison walking down the boardwalk. You know, it was a very, very dynamic time. When I first came to Venice, I saw somebody walking up and down the beach by the surf, and with the cap on his head and flowing robes, and he was a character. Malik Carter, he was a character. Then there was another character. We called him Swami X.
Can you talk a little bit about Swami X?
Swami X was a poet.
Okay.
And he always had to stand on a carton when he did his poetry. And he'd be in front of the sidewalk cafe spouting his poetry. And everybody had the highest regard for Swami X. And then there was some of the artists, Minerva Herzog, who was an incredible, there were incredible artists.
What was incredible about her art?
She had a way of painting people, mainly people, and that really captured the spirit and everything. Susan Weinberg, we became partners, and she showed me how to paint hand-painted fabric. And we had our own business going for a while. She was quite an influence on me. And of course, Harry was quite an influence on me. These were my mentors.
Mm-hmm. So how did Venice influence him? How did he was drawn to it the same as you? Was it
yeah.
different experience for him?
Well, he also was coming out of the LA civil movement, civil rights movement, and he's got work in the Getty now with that movement. Yeah, he was into it like I was. I mean, we were probably more involved in people and the iconic buildings that were still standing, built in 1905, you know, that whole thing.
Do you remember some of those buildings, like the ones that really struck you and you were taken by at that time? Like what those historic buildings were?
Oh, yeah, well, the one on Rose and Oceanfront Walk has always been, because that was one of the very first buildings.
Will you talk about that building? What is it about that building?
Well, for one thing, it was built in 1905 and it's still standing, which is pretty miraculous, you know. And I like the looks of it. I've done a lot of paintings of buildings because I like the architecture and the imagery and the looks. And of course, Danny's bar is no longer here, but I did a series on Danny's. And St. Mark's Hotel. I love the hotels.
How did the work that Harry was doing as a photographer around Venice and your work mesh, intertwine, get influenced by each other?
Well, in the beginning, I guess I didn't finish the story. I painted this piece out of the two of us sitting like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And I decided to start using his negatives for the basic drawing, the line drawing. It starts out as a contour drawing, and then I fill it in from there. And we were both into the environment and the history and the people, you know, and all that, so it worked out really well.
A little bird told me that you built the first skate park in your front yard.
Your front yard, yeah.
Can you tell that story?
So you built a skate park.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about
In the
skate
front
park.
yard. Well, it was my son's endeavor, because he's been a skateboarder, needless to say, all his life. And so he was the one that actually did it. Well, he was a beach boy. Very challenging, because people have always come to Venice to party. And it was really, all I can say is something else. I mean, he'd had funny experiences of people coming up and asking him, hey kid, do you know where I can get such and such? You know, that kind of thing. So that aspect of it was challenging because you didn't want him to be exposed to anything, but yet you couldn't follow him around 24 hours a day either. And when you raise a kid at the beach, it's hard to keep him in school because after the skateboarding, then they get into surfboarding. So that's another
He became a
long.
surfer as
Yeah,
well
he
as a
became an
skateboarder.
excellent surfer. He surfed in Bali, and where they say they have the highest waves that they have. And the skateboard park was his whole doing, and he did it with his friends. What I've experienced about Venice is the change lots of time. For instance, the mural painting changes periodically. And there's a new generation of artists coming on now. And the colors are brighter. I noticed on the murals the colors tend to be brighter, which is great. And so it's just room for improvement, you know. But it's another time. It's moving much faster. And of course, there are tons of restaurants in Venice now, not just two. And we used to have time to either go sit on the beach or go to somebody's house and talk. That's unheard of, you know. And it was a different time. It was a much mellower time, easier time. Things weren't moving quite as fast, but things were getting done. I don't know what it's like now because I've kind of been removed from the scene, but there was always something happening and going down, you know, and because there were causes.
In terms of causes.
Yeah, and we took care of the causes because we didn't want to lose our Venice. I guess to sum up with Venice, it enabled you to make these connections because when your mind is free and clear, it's easier.